Welcome to Book Reporter Talks To, where our guest today is Ruth Ware, who will be joining us from Sussex, England. So it's just lovely to have her here. I had the pleasure of interviewing Ruth in 2015 before In a Dark, Dark Wood came out. It's her first book. I remember she was an author, buzz author. It was a buzz book at Book Expo. It's before the book came out, and I've been wanting to interview her since then. All of her books, I managed to find 4 of the others, there are 5, were Bets On selections. And every single one has been able to keep me up at night, keep me guessing and figuring out what's going on. But I'm here to tell you that those have all been bestsellers, and those have all been books that have been talked about. This one is the best one by one. And I'm going to share with you why I loved it so much today. It's a Book Reporter Bets On selection again. And more than that, I can't wait to dive in and chat with her about it. So welcome, Ruth. So thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And what an amazing introduction. I just want you to do all my introductions from now on, please, Carol. I can't do better than that.
It was so much fun for me because I have all my Bets On books shelved in one room in the house. And I was in there today plucking them off the shelves and just saying, oh, this is a woman who writes every year. This is a book that comes out every single year. We're going to talk about that as well.
So far, don't jinx me. That could be my...
That's exactly. So let's begin by you telling us about One by One.
Okay, well, One by One is a locked room mystery. I do enjoy my locked room mysteries. Set in a luxurious chalet in this really exclusive French resort in the French Alps. And it has 2 narrators for the first time, both kind of outsiders. So narrator number 1 is Erin, who's the chalet host for the chalet, along with her colleague Danny, who's the chef. And narrator 2 is Liz. And Liz is the ex-PA of this .com startup Snoop, which is this music app. And Snoop have come to the chalet to thresh out this kind of make or break buyout offer that they've been given, which could make some of them millionaires, but they are completely split on whether to accept it or not. Half of the directors want to accept the buyout offer and cash in, and the other half want to retain control of the company. And because of her role in the company right back at the beginning, Liz has this tiny 2% shareholding, which she is effectively ended up in this kind of casting vote situation. So she's having enormous pressure put on her by the other members of the board. They all go out for this kind of day of skiing and R&R, supposedly to take their minds off it. And one of the directors goes missing in the snow. At first, it's presumed to be an accident, but when they get back to the chalet, the deaths continue to mount up, and that's when they realise they've probably got a killer in their midst. Oh, and there's an avalanche, just to add to the fun.
It's an avalanche. Just in case being locked in has happened other ways, let's do the avalanche this time. So
Exactly.
Before we get into talking about the book, I want to know, do you ski? Are you a skier?
I do. And that was partly because when I wrote In a Dark, Dark Wood, which was my first crime novel, as you know, I made the protagonist, Nora, a runner. And I got so many sweet letters from people saying, oh, I love running. I can tell you're a runner because you write about it so passionately. And the truth is, I don't even run for the bus, let alone do anything kind of, more strenuous than that. So I felt like a real fraud. And this time when I decided I was going to write about sport, I thought it's going to be something that I really enjoy and really love. And practically the only sport that I do to any extent is skiing. So yes, I am a skier. It also meant I had to research it quite so much.
So if we go skiing together, are we on the greens, the blues, or the blacks, or the double diamonds?
Well, in Europe we have reds as well, just to add to the fun. So my favourite kind of skiing is swooshing elegantly down a blue without kind of exerting myself, where I can do, my nice parallel turns and look like I actually know what I'm doing. I can get down a red in style. I don't attempt blacks at all. They're very much out of my comfort zone. I do sometimes allow myself to be dragged down them protesting if the snow conditions are really right, but I'm not an adventurous skier at all.
Well, I would join you on the blues. Blue is one of my favorite colors. Blue we see on the cover here. And if I always say to people when they say they're going skiing, I said, take a run for me on the blue. If you go on the black, it could be a problem. It definitely could be a problem.
And totally compatible on that score. So that's wonderful.
Well, I remember years ago, I skied with my husband in Telluride, and we'd both never been to Telluride. And he gets up to the top of the slope and he goes, "You can do this." And I said to him, "Wait a second, you've never seen this slope before either." And when you looked down, it was so steep that you couldn't see the side of the town, like you were going to go straight down. And I was just there like, is this like a death wish? Is there something I was supposed to sign before we went and did it? And I kept thinking about that slope as I was reading this book, because there were moments where people are going to be in just that situation. And also where you have to do my least favorite thing, which is ski uphill, like just like duck walk up the hill. And you've got that in there as well. So there's lots of skiing, and it's some of the things I loved, but most of those ones that terrified me are in the book.
There's definitely my love-hate relationship with skiing is in there in both proportions, love and hate. So
And then getting on the lift, and actually where this resort is, where this fabulous chalet is, you actually have to take a lift to get there. Like you can't even just walk in and things like that. So it's completely out of the way. From the beginning, you're set up that you're, okay, this is going to be something really tense. You can feel it right from the beginning. All of the guests work at Snoop, and I just got the crazy. I just thought it was so fun what you wrote about this app. And it gave me a laugh because it's so very techy when you hit there and say Snoop, and this is what's going on. And I'm trying to figure out if it's some of your own thoughts about social media and celeb culture, because what you're doing with Snoop, well, you describe it because it's so funny, like what people are actually doing.
So I knew when I started the novel that I wanted it to be a book about colleagues and the work environment. And so I had to like figure out who these people were, who this company was that was going to hire this chalet. And I toyed around with the idea of it maybe being a hedge fund. I don't know much about finance and it seemed a bit boring. And then I thought, no, I'm going to make it a startup company with an app. And then, of course, I had to invent an app that didn't exist, which is surprisingly hard, let me tell you. So I sat down and kind of brainstormed loads. And I thought it has to be a music app because that kind of, that the music seems sort of fun and it means I can kind of put all of that side of things in. So I invented this app called Snoop, which is, the idea is it sort of hooks up with your Spotify account or your, Apple Music or whatever. And it allows people to see what you're listening to in real time at any one time. So you get to snoop on other people, but the quid pro quo is they get to snoop on you. And the idea is it's like a kind of safe form of intimacy. So you can, go and find out what someone was listening to at the moment their child was born, or, you can hook up with your friend who's in another country and find out what she's listening to as she's lying on the beach or whatever. And it's all in real time. There's no, you can't go back to it. If you weren't there, you miss it. And it's the kind of thing that I could imagine just being really addictive. Like you would just sit there kind of swiping through celebrities and finding out who was listening to what.
And also you might be able to, if they're a music celebrity, figure what their inspiration is, all this kind of stuff. But it's also such a dish on just what celebrity culture is like today, that like somebody would get up and they want to listen to what Madonna was listening to. And you had a number of celebrities like were in there. And I just thought it was so fun because celeb culture is such a big deal. Like, what are celebs doing in the pandemic? What is everyone doing in lockdown? And you're just there like, they're doing the same things we are, basically not that much, but it's like if they put their hair in pigtails, it becomes a story. And it just shows the shallowness of what's going on an amped up level, It
does, but I think also it's a completely everything that you say. It can be really shallow, but it can be surprisingly moving. And there, I don't know if you saw it, but there was this one clip that just went completely viral during lockdown, and it was Snoop Dogg going out to his car and just sitting in his car and recording himself, and he's sitting there in his car listening to Let It Go, and he's just like, I just had to get out for 5 minutes and just sit in my car and play the Frozen soundtrack. And it was so sweet, and it just felt really authentic in a way that is really hard to kind of manufacture. So I feel like Snoop would sit in that sweet spot where it is kind of a little bit performative and a little bit shallow, but it also in some ways genuinely does give you an insight into the real person behind the facade.
And especially in these days, because everyone's in their home, like you see the backdrop, this is my dining room. Someday it will become a dining room again. Right now, there's no need for it. But it's things like that. It's you're looking in the background as much as like, oh, what's on the shelf? Like, what's going on? Like, and I know authors have been trying to spot their books on newscasters, backdrops and things like that. So You definitely have it. You also capture the tension among these Snoop folks so well, because the book opens with bios of the 7 staffers. And they're written in that kind of bro humor kind of a way of like, just amping up who they are. How much fun was it to create those 7 bios up front?
Oh, really fun. And actually, they came in quite late because originally you just kind of started the book and got plunged into who they were. And there's quite a lot of characters. There's um, 8 or 9 company members, depending how you count them. And then there's the 2 chalet hosts. So you've immediately got kind of 11 or 12 people who you're sort of trying to keep track of. Um, and so I got to the end, I thought I have to give people a little bit of a crib sheet
Mm-hmm.
here.
Mm-hmm.
And I could have just listed their characters, but it seemed like Snoop would be the kind of really pretentious company to have a really pretentious website. And I'm sort of fascinated by brands that have a really strong voice and the way they try to, look like all the quirky packaging where it's all a bit folksy or it's all kind of like, hey, we're all in on the joke. And I figured Snoop would be a company that would do that. So yeah, it was huge fun to write. And I think it gives you a little bit of an insight into their characters, even without sort of hearing their own voice.
Yeah, who they are and what they're doing. And then you share right after this BBC News column where we learn how many are dead. So we know this like right up front. And it's like you as the author are delivering a lot up front. What made you decide to do that? I can understand the bios, but also this is how many people are going to die.
Someone said that the other day. They were like, this is a very harsh juxtaposition. And I was like, huh, okay, yeah, it is. And they were like, I'm sure you did that deliberately. And I guess I did do it deliberately, but I hadn't really thought about the effect it would have on the reader, kind of getting to know these people and then being like, oh, 4 of them are dead. I guess part of it was because, as with quite a few of my books, the actual kind of inciting crime doesn't take place until quite a long way into the book.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really wanted to get that sort of sense of mounting dread right from the outset. Like, something is going to happen to these people. You don't know which of them are going to die, but you know how many. And also to play with people's expectations a little bit because you know how many people at the end up dead. It's quite fun for me as a writer to sort of tease and give the impression that it could be this person, or maybe it's not. Maybe there's a death still to come. Who is it going to be? So it's sort of, I guess it's a way to sort of, to signal to the reader that bad stuff is coming.
Mm-hmm.
And the opening is quite jokey because it is these kind of slightly unbearably quirky bios. I guess I just wanted to say this is still a crime novel and bad stuff is still going to happen so that people weren't kind of sort of lured into a false sense of security like it's going to be a comedy or something.
Yeah, even though they were so quippy, though, the quippy is not going to save you when you're in Ruth's hands. Don't think that that's going to be the one. Snoop is supposed to be being sold. The people on this trip could become fabulously wealthy or not. And that alone has the tension built in right from the beginning. And nobody knows that that's really what they're getting together to talk about. They think it's this bonding meeting, but they have no idea about that. But you captured that whirlwind world so well. Did you research a lot of tech companies before you started doing this writing?
I did, yeah. There always seems to be one thing with each book that I have to find out about. And with this book, I was kind of patting myself on the back that I knew enough about skiing not to have to research it. And then I was like, oh, but I know nothing about startup culture. So yeah, I read a lot of books. I listened to a lot of podcasts. There's some brilliant ones out there. One of the ones that I got completely addicted to was there is a podcast called Startup, which was done by the founder of Gimlet Media about the process of starting up Gimlet Media and selling out to Spotify, or well, not selling out, but they kind of merged with Spotify. And that was just perfect. Although I feel obliged to say that their company sounds absolutely lovely and I would love to work there. And it sounds like a very caring, healthy work environment, which Snoop emphatically is not. So although I did take some of the kind of, nuts and bolts from that, the kind of the toxicness of Snoop came from other places, which I better not mention for fear of getting sued. But yeah, I did read a lot of books on startup culture and kind of how to take a company from 60. And one of the things that really interested me was the fact that in many cases, these people have a brilliant idea and they have the resources or the contacts or the know-how to kind of to make it into something huge and to do justice to that idea. But both of those things don't necessarily give you the skills to look after a company and to look after the employees within the company. And that's something that you hear about again and again in podcasts and reading books, is CEOs who've, it's just been them and a friend in a bedroom for 3 years, and suddenly they've got a staff of 60 people and they're having to deal with HR and hiring and firing and company practices, and they're just not equipped to do it. And some of them, rise amazingly to the challenge and do a great job and hire the right people to help it, to be a smooth process. But it's very easy to imagine a situation in which some of them probably don't look after their staff well. And that's part of what the book explores.
Yeah. When you say I love Guy Raz does a podcast that's called How I Built This. And it's how all these companies, many companies, not just tech companies, got built. I highly recommend it because it's like, this is how we built Spotify. This is how we built. And they also talk about what went wrong along the way, because everybody almost goes bankrupt at some point. Everybody, and we always know the good.
Isn't it?
We don't know the days where I had no idea where cash and flow were going to be. And that never enters the equation. And then there's another one I like that's called Pivot, that just talks about the tech market today. And it's just like one of those things where they're kind of snarky with each other or whatever, but you feel like you get this inside look at what the culture is like. And it is very different from book publishing or just about anything else we do, because it moves quickly. You can get undermined really fast. Like, okay, with TikTok, what's going to happen? Where's it going to go? What are you going to do? But you realize there are people that are pacing like little, rats on a wheel right now, trying to figure out exactly how to get better position. And I think you set that up in this, because who's going to nip at our heels? What's going to happen? Should we go now? You've definitely got that nailed.
And they've all got these kind of predecessor specters of, people who did it right and people who didn't, and who were taken over in hostile takeovers. And that must be such a weird feeling, to sort of be constantly looking over your shoulder and wondering if you're, a Facebook or a MySpace or a...
Well, it's really funny because we started the company about 24 years ago this week. Okay. And when we started, our choices were to be on AOL, Prodigy, or CompuServe. Those were the three. Well, we picked AOL, we picked right. And then they put 45 companies into business, and we're one of three still standing. And the others are the Motley Fool and the Not. So you always sit there and say, look, I'm not the Motley Fool and I'm not the Not. But the same token, how many ideas came along and then just didn't work? They just didn't. They were either half-baked ideas, either that, or they had a time, but the time didn't last, things like that. So it is just this crazy, crazy, crazy culture. But once again, with your locked door mystery, we're locked in this place where, of course, there's going to be no internet or phone. At the beginning, it's great. At the beginning, we'll do the PowerPoint, we can pull in all the emails and everything. And I do love when everybody goes down and says, it's not working. And Erin gives this very complicated reason about why. And the guy just turns around and says, I don't care why. I just want to know when it's going to be back on. And it's so tech talk of like, I don't really care. I just have like what I need. Just turn it on for me. Turn it on. What intrigues you about locking these people in this place where they can only communicate with each other and they've got to get their wits about them?
I think there's kind of two answers to that. And one is that I love locked room mysteries. I love reading them. I love writing them. I think as a writer, it forces you to get really creative, because you only have the tools and the equipment that you give yourself at the start of the novel. And you can't have, a Deus Ex Machina detective coming in to solve everything, or some, convenient expert who can help you figure stuff out. You only have the kind of the savvy and the know-how and the resources of the characters that you've seeded in there at the beginning. So yeah, it makes you really creative as a writer, and it's fun to read as a reader, because, there's always the possibility that a writer can kind of pull a fast one on the final page and be like, it was the evil twin that you didn't see since page 2. And you can't really do that with a locked room mystery, not in the same way. So I think as a reader, it feels like a genre in which the writer is forced to play pretty fair with reader. But the other kind of answer to your question is sort of about the whole communications aspect. And, we're constantly hearing about how this is a struggle for the 21st century writer, because you know, nobody is ever more than a phone call away from help or a Google away from expert information on any subject. And that's true. And it's something I've kind of gone back and forth with in my novels in terms of, you know, I've taken the characters' phones away in some books, I haven't in others. But there's no denying that technology is, while it's a pain in some ways, it gives the writer huge opportunities in terms of, you know, the ways that we can be horrible to each other and spy on each other and survey each other are now infinitely more complicated and more twisted because of the technology that we've allowed into our lives. And that's definitely something that I explored in The Turn of the Key, where, you know, technology is this sort of bogeyman that kind of permeates the whole novel. And in this book, I think I sort of went for a kind of halfway house thing, in that the characters do get their, you know, the mobile phone reception goes down quite quickly, which felt realistic for an avalanche. But the Snoop technology is still a really important plot point. I don't want to give anything away, but the characters are constantly both aware and unaware of how much information Snoop is gathering about people, what they have on file, what they know about their users. And it's something that all the members of the company are kind of both concerned about and sort of resigned to in a weird kind of way. And that's, I think that's just fascinating because it's something that all of us are dealing with as consumers. And we're all every day balancing up how much we're prepared to swap privacy for convenience in our everyday lives. And I think anything that aspect, I think, is immediately relevant to all of us in a, you know, obviously in a much smaller way.
Yeah, it completely is. And then you also have Danny and Erin who are running this place. They're in charge of this luxury chalet and meeting the other guests' every single need. But I really love when they get there and we know that there's a problem right away because there are 9 rooms and 10 guests and somebody's going to have to share. And it's all because the assistant didn't count right and didn't figure things out and forgot Liz, who's always been forgotten. And she's like, you know, it's kind of like the odd person out. So I feel like you're giving the reader a lot up front about, oh, wow, everything's just gone completely wrong from the check-in process right on down. And then who's going to have to share? So right away, it's like, oh, we've got this big decision to make. So is it the right political thing to do to have who go with what? And then the decision just gets made like on a dime. It's like, just do this.
I think it's always, you know, putting people under pressure is always a really good way to show you stuff about their characters quickly, because everybody is performative in a way. And when you put people in a difficult situation, you see them flip from the person they're kind of, you know, presenting to the world and the suave, calm, sophisticated, caring employer to the person they actually are, who is deeply pissed off, tossing out blame like it's, you know, they weren't involved in all of this, and making it the problem of underlings to solve. But I think it also, partly what I wanted to show sort of early on in the novel, is the fact that Snoop is quite a toxic employer, which I've, you know, already talked about a bit. They've allowed some really unhealthy practices to build up a company. They're not taking care of their employees. But on the flip side, I wanted to show that actually being at work can be a hugely positive thing. And Erin and Danny are 2 great colleagues. They really have each other's backs. They have a really lovely working relationship. They're constantly supportive of each other. They're constantly kind of trying to figure out ways to make each other's lives easier and back each other up in front of the guests. And the beginning of the novel, I think, kind of sets out my stall in that respect. It shows, you know, who is looking out for each other and who is not.
Right. And you're completely at the beginning, you're like, oh, these 2, whatever they can do. I love also that they have a few hours to flip around the chalet from the previous guest, but they always try to hit the hot tub or the pool, like right before the guests arrive. And it's like this dash of get out of your bathing suit and greet them at the front door. Like everything is just like wonderful and we're not enjoying this place at all. So I think that was really good. You know, everything happens over 5 days. It's just going to be this real brisk whatever. Setting a book in a tight time frame like that, is it a lot of constraints on you, or does it force you to, you know, push the story forward a lot more quickly?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, typically, I've written books that take place over a very short time frame before. So, in fact, In a Dark, Dark Wood takes place almost entirely over, well, the honeymoon.
Not the honeymoon yet.
That's a Freudian slip. The headlight portion of it takes place over 48 hours. And then there's another timeline where my narrator is in hospital, and that takes place over sort of 3 or 4 days. And there is something about it makes plotting quite easy, because you don't have to sort of think about how to get the characters from A to B and what to do when you jump these 3 months. You just keep going through the timeline. But the difference with this novel, and I think the first time I've set a book in such a short period of time without having 2 timelines, is that it does unfold virtually in real time. So there's no back and forth, there's no separate timelines, you don't really get any flashbacks. It's just the characters waking up and going to sleep. And it was quite fun to do, but I think it also gives the book a real kind of sense of claustrophobia, because you're almost experiencing these events in real time with the characters.
The water freezes, this happens. I'm not going to give everything away, but it's just like every single time they get up in the morning, something worse is happening.
Yeah,
you're just
something else has gone wrong.
Yeah, it is. It's going to go completely there. I also remember when I first talked to you about In a Dark, Dark Wood, you were talking about a hen party, and this one was so crazy. And I said, what was yours like? And I remember your answer. It was like dull by comparison. It was so boring by comparison, but you wrote like a real killer one in that book. So you can actually take your skiing skills to a whole new level here. You can lie down like without fear, or you could be totally a wreck. Either one, you could write yourself right into the story of who you want to be. You know, I read this on a very hot and humid summer day, and I wanted to go put on a jacket. I mean, you wrote cold so well. I could see the breath coming out of my mouth like they were seeing it in the house and all those kinds of things. Where did you get the idea for the setting for this book and to write a book that's against this backdrop? Besides, it's a sport you already know and love.
I really love novels of the film The Grand Hotel Budapest, where it's like, you know, this sort of shallow, this kind of hotel in the Alps. It's really remote, it's got a funicular going up to it, and there's a few novels set in sort of similar circumstances, and I'd always wanted to write something like that, but I didn't feel like a hotel was quite the right, I don't know, for some reason a chalet felt more kind of claustrophobic and more scary. I think it's just that I love the Alps, and I started writing the book in summer, and I often find myself writing in opposition to the season, and I think that is because I'm not really a summery person. I like spring and fall are my favourite seasons, and so I guess it was hot and muggy, and I was just, I was craving being up in the Alps in the kind of the clear air and the crisp skies. And so I got to travel in my imagination. So I'm very glad it was convincing.
Oh, it was very convincing. It was very convincing. I was going to put on something warm, and I was like, wait a second, it is so hot in this pool. I can't believe that I'm doing this. But you wrote cold very, very well. Are you a fast writer? Because the books are very quickly paced. Do you write quickly as well, that same acceleration?
I write less quickly now than I used to. I think my first book I wrote in about 3 months or something, although I took a lot longer editing it. And when I get into the swing of it, I can write a lot. I can write 7,000 words in a day if it's going well. And a book is only, 100,000 words. So if you did that every day, you could have a novel done in like sort of, 14 days in theory. But I have to take breaks. I have to kind of let the inspiration refill. And it sounds very pretentious, but I kind of envisage my imagination as a bit like a well, and you can draw a certain amount of water out of it, but after a while you just have to sit back and wait for it to refill. But yeah, I've done a book every year so far, and it takes me typically about 6 months to write it, with kind of breaks for family stuff and holidays and stuff, and then about another 6 months to edit it. So I don't know if that's quick or not. I feel like there's writers who write faster than that, and then there's people like Donna Tartt who take 10 years to write a book. I'm kind of comfortably in the middle.
Yeah. Now, when you were doing this, did you actually sketch the mountain and sketch the house and like draw the character features? Like, do you have that someplace that you remember so-and-so has blonde hair, so-and-so, like when you're just referring to people, and a drawing of the mountain of how they're going to get down so that if they have to do it again, they do it the same way?
I don't typically write many So no, I just rely on my memory for, for characteristics and stuff like that. Although I did have a list of names because there are quite a lot of characters, and particularly at the beginning, I was like, what's her surname? Who's he? How old is he? So I had a kind of very brief sort of one-line biog for each character. But one thing I did, which I rarely do because I have quite a visual imagination, so I normally don't need this, but I drew a piece map, and I kind of figured out how all the runs went together and where the house was on the mountain and how all of the ski runs went up and down. And actually it was super useful when we got to the editorial stage because I was able to give it to the copy editor when they were saying, hang on a minute, when a minute ago they were going up this, and I was like, that's because. And when I was editing, it made it much easier to kind of clarify a few bits of the geography resort, which would otherwise have been a bit confusing. So yeah, I did spend. I'm not a very good artist, otherwise I would show you the sketch, but it's a bit embarrassingly amateur. But yeah, somewhere on my desk there's like a little plan of the resort with all of the runs named and all of the ski lists named. It was fun to do.
Yeah, because it's also because if they're going to get off at mid-mountain or they're going to keep going, it will get them to two different places. And also, I always love, we used to ski, and my sister was very good at getting lost. And like, I'd sit there later on and go, where did you go? And how did you get there? And I remember one time we were skiing, and her idea at the end of the day, because she was lost, was not to continue to ski down. It was to go up and see if she could find me. And it was, I think we were in Vail or something like that. And I was like, do you understand that like that was not the right thing to do? And there's always like, there was another time where we were skiing down and there were 3 ways to come down. There was easy, medium, and hard. And she came down the hard one, and we were waiting down the bottom, and we were just sitting in horror going, like, really? Like there's this really easy option. And then there's one that you could kill yourself on. And it's just like, whoomp, whoomp, whoomp on the moguls. So when I was sitting there, I was thinking about, you had to have something drawn because the house is in a location and you could go a couple of different ways to get to it. But then of course there's the avalanche, so things are shut down and you can't get there. It was just so well done.
And so much of skiing is exactly as you say, standing around looking at piece maps going, well, if we take the such and such lift, then, we could end up at that nice cafe with the hot chocolate. And so I had to have a map to figure it all out. I don't think I could have held it in my head.
We took my younger son skiing to town. My husband and I actually met at a ski resort in Colorado. We met out in Crested Butte like years and years and years ago. So we brought him back for his, I think it was his high school graduation. And we go skiing and he takes off and goes, and we decided where we were going to meet up. And my husband goes, he is never going to get there. That run does not get there. Like where we're thinking is going to happen. And I think that the best thing happened to skiing was the cell phone, because we used to ski with walkie-talkies, like so we could at least find each other on the mountain. And everyone had these like walkie-talkies, we're all on the same frequencies, like set your frequency for the day. But then the cell phone made it so much easier to find each other. But I was always terrified I was going to drop my phone off the lift and that would be it. I'd be like, I never see anybody for the rest of the day. So technology has even crept into skiing, and they even have now how many minutes you're going to be on the lift. Like you just used to know it was going to be bad. Now you know it's really bad. So there's all this kind of stuff. But you also wrote in the typical tech guy who's going to do code no matter where he is. And I thought he was just such a funny character in a lot of ways, because everybody is also off skiing and doing what they're doing. And instead he's just sitting there like, I think I've got a new angle on this. And it's just, and there's that guy at every one of the companies like that.
There is, but also I feel a lot of sympathy that he's Elliot, and I feel an enormous amount of sympathy for Elliot because he is slightly that guy, but also there's that person on every skiing holiday who is not into skiing and has been dragged along by their friends and relations for like compulsory fun. And they're just, very often you see people out on the slopes who are just completely miserable. And one of the things that I really wanted to give to Elliot was the power to say, thanks, but no. And nobody else in the company is allowed to do this because basically the boss is just, he's a complete sort of, I not swear on this, but he's generally quite a bullying person who feels everybody should share his enthusiasm. But the tech guy is his best friend, and he's the only one who sort of stands up to him and says, no, I'm not going to do it. So for that reason, I love him. He's like my favorite character, or one of.
And you wrote out who I thought was going to be a big character really early. I mean, she meets her death really, really early in the book. And I was just there like, whoa, what's going to happen from here? Because we're not that far in and we're down one. And I'm like, one by one, who's going to be left at the end? You know, if we're in this right now. And I thought it was kind of a brave thing. I'm not going to say, but and I'm not going to say who it was, but it was just a brave thing I felt to do to write that person out at that point, because it shifted everything really quickly from the situation that was the problem at hand, then became a different situation with the business.
Yeah.
So
but she's still very present in the rest of the novel. She's still a very important character, but I always want people to care about my characters. I don't particularly like novels where people just die and they sort of just feel like a disposable person, you know, oh, it's a body kind of, you know. So I wanted you to care about the person I was going to kill off and to be interested in them. So.
And I was also very interested in the clothes that everybody was wearing, because Liz feels like the outsider with her clothes, but everybody else is wearing the exact right ski jacket, the exact right this, every single thing has been completely thought through. And you know, there's some assistant that's running back and forth with these clothes like 19 times to get them right. And then you've got somebody who realizes she's coming downstairs in her dress and she's not going to look like everybody else, no matter how hard she tries. And there is that when you go skiing, you see some people are like magnificently, you know, done. They've been to Gorsuch, they have their fabulous outfit on. Here are the people, they're just like ready to go skiing. And you've got both of those in the book.
And Liz is me to a large extent. Like, I've got a lot more confidence as I've got older, but, you know, as you know, working in books and the publishing industry, there's a lot of super glamorous, really well-dressed people around. And I can't tell you the number of parties I've gone to where I've just stood there and thought, oh my gosh, you know, I'm the only person not wearing heels. I'm the only person in a slightly saggy dress that's from, you know, a really cheap store rather than a designer label. And so, you know, that was kind of my insecurities going into that character as she walks down the staircase and just kind of cringes into herself and thinks, oh God, I'm dressed wrong again, you know.
Yeah, I remember I worked at Condé Nast before this, where fashion was everything. It's the reason I'm matching your book today. I always joke with the readers that I try to match the cover of the book, but it was like what you wore was who you are. And it took a long time to undo that. What you wear does not necessarily make you smarter, better. And I remember one time we had a new publisher come in and somebody said, I'm going to get along with her well. We both wear Chanel. And I sat there going, that line, I've got to remember, I've got to write that into something someplace, because the fact that that was the way you were to be relating to your boss was just, and I felt like in this book, it was the same thing. It's like, who knew the right thing to do was going to get you ahead.
It's a good thing you didn't tell me that line before I wrote it, because I would totally have stolen it and put it in the book.
You can have it because it's so great. It's just, they're just some of those moments that you just think back and say, what did somebody just say to me? It's like, that's the moment.
How much of a different life are they leading?
I know. It's like, really, is this like, okay, well, all right, maybe I have to go there so I can talk to her again. I mean, it was just really funny. And it was always about what you were wearing, to the point where, though, because it was such an obsession when in this office where I worked for 17 years, I always now think about what I'm going to wear before I think about what I'm going to say, because I always say I could write on the plane whatever I have to do, but if I don't have the right clothes, I'm stuck.
So, no, it's so true. And actually, I do really admire people who make clothes into an art form. And I think a lot of the characters in the book have done that. It's sort of that Wears Prada thing of, it is hard to look really good and to maintain that and to kind of project that look onto the world. And you have to respect that when people know a lot about fashion. But yeah, it can be very exclusionary. And I think that's what Liz experiences, that she's always on the outside of every group, because she just doesn't share the same background, the same know-how, and the same financial resources as the rest of the characters.
You know, years ago, the Gap, when the Gap was actually first starting, it was, I guess, late 70s, really, but they were trying to turn themselves into a fashion company. And they sent everybody at the magazine a box of clothes, like every single, the assistants and whatever. And the editors got slightly better. And this, you know, we got like a plaid shirts or whatever, but everybody got stuff. And it was such a smart marketing move, I felt, because it put everybody on the same level if everyone was wearing the Gap. But by the same token, if those clothes were around, if you needed a white t-shirt on a shoot, that's what you were going to use, because something else would have to be called in. And I thought, this is such a clever, it's one of those clever marketing things I still remember. And I feel like when I was reading about these people, it was what was going to be about this app that was going to be applicable to everybody. It was going to be Switzerland. And I was thinking about the Gap thing because anybody could wear it, but what you wore it with was the thing that would make it different.
Yeah, that's so true.
And you've all got the box. You've all got access. They've all got access to the same music. They've all got access to everybody's playlist. But who are you listening to? Are you listening to the coolest one or which one? And I thought it was really good.
No, exactly.
So do you always know where you're going to end up? Like, do you know where you're going to end up in the book at the very beginning, or do you write and not know the end as well?
I generally always know who done it and why. Well, sometimes aspects of the why kind of appear as I'm writing. And I think I know thriller writers who do it differently, but I think for me, it's really, really important to play fair with the reader and to give them a good chance at guessing who done it and to give them all the clues they need to get there. Hopefully not make it too obvious because you don't want people kind of clocking it on page 2. But my aim is that when somebody gets to the end of the book and it's revealed, and actually it's maybe not at the end of the book in some of my novels,
right.
You should think, of course, like it shouldn't come as a surprise. It should feel like pieces slotting into place that are kind of inevitable. So I think in order to do that and in order to play fair with the reader, you need to have all of that information in your head beforehand, because otherwise you can't drop the breadcrumbs if you don't already have the breadcrumbs in your pocket. So I always know those kind of important bones of the plot, but what happens along the way, who does what, who finds out what, how the mystery's solved, all of that is very often completely up for grabs. And sometimes I do write myself into corners where I'm kind of like, oh, we've got to discover such and such, and I have no idea how to make it happen. So, that's always the point where I think if only I was one of those writers who plots out every aspect of my novel beforehand, I wouldn't be stuck. But it's also, it's fun figuring things out along with the reader. And very often my characters surprise me. So I hope that they surprise the reader as well.
Yeah, and at the beginning, when you realize the avalanche is coming, what's going to be destroyed, which house is destroyed, there's a whole reason they can't be found, but you don't find that out till later. And it's just a slip of a tongue. I mean, it's just, there's so many layers in this because you do figure out what's going on, but by the same token, they're still stuck. No matter what ends up happening, you still have not skied your way out of this little disaster that you put yourself in. So which character was the easiest to write? Because you have so many characters in this book. Did somebody come to you right away and was completely smooth?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question. I mean, quite a lot of the minor characters just came to me wholesale. So like Carl, who's he's the lawyer in charge of the company, and he's just kind of quite long suffering and quite pissed off with everybody, and he's not down with all the kind of ridiculous hipness of Snoop. He just wants to do his 9 to 5 and go home. And he just came to me like fully formed. He was just such a great character. And I was just like, yes, that's how I would feel, Carl. I have great sympathy for your position.
And Erin figures out that's who he is. They figure out right away. Okay, that's who that guy is.
And actually, Erin came to me very quickly. She was always the person that she ended out being. Her voice came to me really fast. And right from the start, she had this really great relationship with Danny, and that was something that never changed. But lots of the other characters, I was sort of finding out more about them. And I think one of the things with a book that has lots of characters early on is you have to spend a lot of time kind of figuring out who they are and how you're going to convey that to the reader very quickly. So that, the beginning of this book took longer for me to write than lots of my other books. And I actually got to about 30,000 words and then went back, which I very, very rarely do. Normally I just keep writing. And I was like, no, it's not working, it's not right. And I made some major changes and rejigged stuff. And I think that was just because I'd set myself a big technical challenge. I had a lot of voices, a lot of characters, and they all had to be right from the beginning.
It was like pieces of a clock in a puzzle. They all had to go together because if one piece was missing or it wasn't right formed, it wasn't going to get the puzzle to come together at the end. And that's what I very much felt is if any one of the characters was doing something a little offbeat, it just wasn't going to work. And right at the beginning, like Danny is a great chef, But then when he can't cook, what is he going to be able to make? What is he going to be able to create? So you also have each of them having to find some inner resiliency on every single level, because these kind of hopeless, kind of helpless people all of a sudden have to get some inner grit. Either that or they're not going to survive. It's just not going to happen.
Absolutely. And also, I think the thing about Erin and Danny, which they sort of become quite scarily aware of, is that they're in this very weird position where in theory they are sort of subordinate to the guests, because they're there to kind of do whatever they want, to fulfill their orders, to make their drinks, to serve their food, to make their holiday wonderful. But they're also in charge because they are the chalet hosts. The guests are there under their sufferance. They, what they say goes to a certain extent. And at the beginning, that's not something they have to kind of work to maintain. But as events start to sort of pile up, and as the chalet physically starts to crumble, Erin in particular becomes really aware that if she doesn't hold on to her authority, someone else is going to take it, and that someone else is probably going to be one of the people at Snoop, and they may not make great decisions. So she and Danny sort of are in this kind of weird sort of quasi-authoritarian, quasi-subordinate sort of position, and part of the novel is about them sort of navigating that and trying to hold on to their position, because they know if they let go of it, bad stuff is probably going to happen.
And they're also realizing they're protective of the house, because the house is where everyone's going to leave. Every week, new people come in, but for them, it's their job. And if everything doesn't go right at this house, they could be out of a job. And something happens with a key. I will not say any more, but something happens with that flips a lot of things that are going on in the book. And there's a moment of responsibility of how did that end up happening? Because I'm in charge. And I messed up. So where did this whole situation go fly from there? So I think there's a lot about responsibility it's a responsibility of who's responsible for Snoop, who's responsible for the sale of Snoop, who's responsible for this house, and who's in charge. And it keeps flipping all throughout, because I don't care if the CEO of what, when the snow car's coming down and you don't know really where you are, you can't be in charge. You have to rely on somebody else. How snarky as you are about it.
One of my favourite scenes in the book is where the chef comes into the kitchen and he says, Topher's out there trying to order a helicopter, and it's obviously not going to come, but like he's on his phone, like he just can't believe that his money isn't going to get him out of this situation, because he's never been in a position where he couldn't kind of buy his way out of it. And Danny's like, yeah, it's not going to happen, because look out of the window at the storm, nothing's going to fix that. And it's that kind of crunch moment of realization that you can have all the money in the world, but there are some things that you just cannot fix.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to do this. Did you always know which of the characters were going to die? Like which of the one by ones were going to be picked off, or did that sort of happen more organically?
No, that happened organically, and I went back and wrote the newspaper article at the end. So the newspaper article that begins at the beginning, where it tells you how many people had died, I had the shell of it, but I went back and edited it when I got to the end to make it fit, because who died exactly when and why was all up for grabs.
All for grabs. At one point, there are two characters together in the house. I'm going to read this one. One asks, how are you going to kill the time? And I just thought that was such a great line. It ends a chapter. And I want to say, if you only knew how we were going to kill the time. And I love sly lines like that. Do you enjoy writing them?
I do very much, and there's a few moments where one of the characters kind of says something that's really unfortunate. I can't remember. There's one where someone says like over my dead body, and then kind of goes. That's it. They say, "Oh, it's your funeral," and everybody's like, "Ooh, okay." No. I very much enjoy stuff like that, because it's the kind of thing I would say and then be like, "Oh no, that was really bad," and be sort of looking around, wondering if anyone else had clocked it. So putting characters in that situation is both incredibly cruel and also really satisfying. But I do enjoy ending a chapter on a really good line, and it's really satisfying when the first, the right one just comes to you and just drops in, and you're like, boom, yes, chapter 2. Sometimes it takes real hard work, and that's the thing, actually much more so than beginnings. I know authors talk a lot about first lines, but for me, it's often the end of a chapter that I struggle most with. And it's kind of like, is this the right place to end it? Should it have ended a paragraph earlier? That's what I spend more editing time on, I think.
Last year we interviewed Sherry LaPena, and what she said is she wants to make sure that you want to keep going. And what I felt was there were so many times I've actually looked at that at the end of your chapters, and I did want to keep going. Like as soon as I saw that line, I was like, "Oh, how are we going to kill the time?" I was like, I got to go because there's going to be something here on that next page. And so much of it is that pacing that keeps you turning the pages and keeps you, I mean, that's the sign of a thriller. And then I always say, like, I read it in a day. That's a good thing because it just kept my attention the entire time.
Well, there is a writer that does make you feel a bit like it took me a year to
I know.
write.
It's like, I'm not sure if he wants to hear that, but it also made you
No, I
completely
take it as a complete compliment. And when I was sitting down to write, I just thought if there's one thing I want to do, it's to give people a reason to turn the page because I think we have so many demands on our time now. There's so many apps and TV shows and films and brilliant, entertaining, absorbing computer games that we could give our lives over to. You have to give people a really good reason to not just to pick up a book, but to keep going with it because it's an investment of time. So it just makes me incredibly happy if if that was your experience.
That was my experience. It completely was. I also looked, Imogene Church has narrated, I think, all of your audiobooks to date. Have you ever met her or do you talk to her at all about the books? Because I went back because I saw she was doing this one because at the end of our podcast, we always include an audio excerpt. But then I went and I said, I've got this funny feeling maybe she's done, I think, all of them. So have you met or did you select her?
In person, but we talk a lot on Twitter, and I kind of feel like I know her now because I've seen her do so many kind of recordings and she puts up little films and stuff. She's really smart, really funny. She's really good at asking me about stuff. I love because things like how is this pronounced and what did you mean by this, and there's certain lines, I'm not going to say which ones because it's a bit of a spoiler, but in one of my books there's a line that has to be delivered a certain way, otherwise it's a spoiler if you kind of give it a different inflection. And she's great at all of that. She's really clever about picking things like that out. But no, I didn't choose her. My I think British publishers picked her, but in a dark wood, and I think they sent me a sample and said, do you love it or hate it? And I said, yeah, it's great. And since then, yeah, she's become like the voice of my novels, which is so lovely because I feel like oftentimes readers who listen on audio have as much of a relationship with the narrator as they do with you. So it's great that there's kind of a consistency there.
Do you listen to audiobooks? Is that a format you enjoy?
I love audiobooks. I don't listen to my own. I always listen to a little bit just to kind of make sure that it's all fine. But it's too weird. It's like listening to your own voice on your answer phone or something, the way it always makes you cringe a bit. You're like, oh God, do I really sound like that? Even though it's not my voice, it's still my words. But I love other people's audiobooks. I listen to them in the car. I listen to them while I'm cooking. I listen to them when I'm out walking. And weirdly, I'm not a big music listener, which considering a book is about a music app is probably surprising. I enjoy music, but I would typically only have it on if we've got people over and I need some kind of background music to stop the room from feeling weird. But no, if I'm out by myself and I need distraction, it's either podcast or audiobook. And
as a result, because the way the words are spoken on either a podcast or on an audiobook really matter, the inflections or whatever, do you find you read your books aloud to yourself to see, am I repeating words? Is the cadence on this right? Because either that or maybe it affects the way you write because you're such an audio listener. Have you thought about that at all?
I don't know. I don't read my books aloud. I always feel like I should. I always feel like it's a very writerly thing to do. And I think it's Anne Tyler has this amazing method where I think she writes longhand and then she reads it out aloud and records herself and then types it up from the recording or something. I may not have that completely right, but it's this very laborious kind of process that involves basically 2 drafts. Which is, I think, probably why her prose is so good. I don't do that, partly because I don't have time when I'm writing a book a year. but I do hear the words very strongly in my head when I'm writing, and when I read it back to myself, it is literally like, so I don't know that saying them aloud would actually add very much.
Mhm.
I hear it like someone speaking in my ear when I'm reading down a page. Um,
You're
yeah,
probably
people.
so in tune with it because you listen to audiobooks so much. It's influenced your writing simply because you're used to hearing. You're used to hearing the spoken word as well.
But there's nothing more irritating than when you listen to an audiobook of a book you know well and the narrator delivers a line wrong, like puts the wrong inflection on it or something, and you're like, no, you completely misunderstood.
You didn't do it right. That's not correct.
I always want to write in and say, please re-record that bit.
Can we just redo that a little bit? I always felt if I had written something and then I had to read it, I would say, oh, wait, let's change that phrase. And I know authors have recorded their own work and they said it's really hard because you say, oh, I should have had this word there, but you can't. You have to sit there and say exactly the way it was. So,
I do edit when I do readings at events.
oh, you
Partly because it has to stand alone for the for the audience if you're only reading a chunk. But yeah, I edit really freely. I don't feel bad about that. But yeah, if it was going to be recorded, I would probably feel obliged to stick to the script.
But you think about it, in a pandemic, the one thing you're not going to do is do a reading at an event because it's probably not going to be doing that. It's going to be a lot, but it's interesting because I think you're going to be able to talk to people around the world. I mean, I had hoped you'd come to New York last year. You didn't. And now they said, well, she's coming next year. And I'm like, well, no, she's still not, but I can still talk to her. Figure that one out. You know?
Virtual events is the way forward. Virtual festivals.
Yeah, it's like wonderful. Now, are you a huge Agatha Christie fan? Like when you were growing up, because so much of your writing is in that Agatha Christie kind of a mode of like, and then there were none. You know, was that something that you really enjoyed? Was that pleasure reading for you?
It definitely was. And this book, I think, is more Christie-ish than some of my recent ones. I
Mhm.
mean, The Death of Mrs. Westaway was probably more heavily influenced by Daphne du Maurier, which is where the sort of Cornish setting came from. And The Turn of the Key was obviously a nod to Henry James and The Turn of the Screw. So I sort of felt like I'd strayed away from Christie as an inspiration a bit. And one by one, it's by no means a rewrite. I've seen some people describe it as a reimagining of And Then There Were None, and it's not. The plots have really nothing in common apart from the fact that it's a locked room mystery and lots of people get murdered. But I think Christie was one of the first crime writers that I read. And I think she really imprinted on me what a crime novel should be in terms of the way it should be plotted, the way the author should play fair with the reader, the way that the clues should sort of all click satisfyingly into place with hopefully no loose ends, or no loose ends that you can't kind of figure out where they were supposed to go. And those are the kind of pleasures that I strive to give readers. So yeah,
Yeah.
you say she's an inspiration in those terms.
Yeah, these little twists, and we're going to take you here, and we're going to take you there, and it's so you've been writing a book a year. I take it that you're deep into the next one. Are you 6 months in, editing in? Where are you at this point?
I'm actually not. So yeah, normally I deliver a book in the summer, and then I start a new book in September, and I deliver the next one. I deliver it the following summer. So normally I would be delivering a book about now. But I was slightly late delivering this one. It's just each year I've kind of crept back and back a little bit because I think, as I've gone on, I've been doing more events, more touring, more festivals, more everything, more publicity, and that all is time that I'm not at my desk. The deadlines had kind of been going back and back and back, and this one I delivered in the autumn. And I literally just started editing it when the pandemic hit and we all went into lockdown. And at that point, I was at home with my husband and my kids, who I was trying to homeschool, not very successfully, trying to edit my novel, trying to do, all of the million and one other things, and keep up with the news and cope with the idea that, we're now in this sort of, 2-year long unending kind of situation. And the creative part of my brain just shut down. And editing was fine. I edited one by one, really enjoyed it. The distraction was great. It took me longer than usual because I was combining it with all this other stuff. But I just could not seem to kind of access that sort of part of my brain that needs to think, what if? And every time I thought, what if, it would go off on some, coronavirus past. I just want to be exploring. Not to mention the fact that I find it really hard to write when other people are in the house, which
Hmm.
sounds really weird and pretentious, but I don't know. I need to sort of feel like there's no one looking over my shoulder, metaphorically. So yeah, normally I would be kind of 6 months to a year into writing a book, and I'm not, but I have ideas for the first time since a long time. Um, I have a book that I'm pretty sure I want to write, and yeah, it's the kind of it's the honeymoon phase where it could be anything. It could be my Nobel Prize winning.
Could be my best. And that's where I'm going to sit my head right now. I can't think of anything negative. I must stay very positive, you know?
I love there's this amazing quote by I think it's by Sadie Jones, the British novelist, and she said, when you write a book in your head, it's a cathedral, and on the page, it's a garden shed. And it's so true, but it does mean that I'm still at the cathedral stage at the moment, where it could be.
Which is a good place to stay, especially now. It was funny because I couldn't read at the beginning. I couldn't concentrate to read because I thought there were so many things coming at us. And when you think about, okay, I say that March to June this year was a year, and then July was 20 minutes, and August has been about 15. And it's like this accelerated pace. But those first couple of months, and then I think back to things I did in January, and it's like, oh, January, that was a lifetime
Another
ago.
lifetime, I know. Yeah, amazingly. I mean, we were skiing in February. That was like literally what we were doing right before lockdown. We were in Val d'Isere skiing very similar runs to the ones in my book. And yeah, I look back on it and I'm like another world. We
I
went
know.
abroad.
I
We
know.
were in bars with strangers.
Do you find that you watch TV now? Like I watch shows and I'm like, they're not social distancing. Like, and all these, like, they talk about TV reshooting and like, we're gonna be able to do this. I'm watching all these people in these love scenes. I'm like, do you do a COVID test like 10 minutes before? Like what is gonna happen when there's all these crowds in restaurants? Because now I find I'm looking at places and I'm like, whoa, those are how people used to go out. This is what we used to do.
They're all like in bars like this. I'm like, no, stop breathing over each other. No, completely. It's really weird. It's lessening off slightly now. I think that things are getting a little bit more normal and
Yeah.
people are going to pubs and restaurants, albeit in a kind of distanced manner. But yeah, there was a period where I would kind of watch TV and be like, this feels like a foreign land.
Well, I actually got really excited because we like to cook and it's a good thing. But at the beginning, a lot of the food stores here were out of food and everybody like couldn't figure it out. And I said, like one time, one of my friends went and she was buying poultry and she said the only thing left was a duck breast. And I was like, how odd. Like people actually said, I've had this in a restaurant. I can make it myself. And you're just sitting there like, do you know what you're getting yourselves involved in? But everybody was like, oh, and I remember hearing that the Joy of Cooking ebook was selling like off the shelves because everybody realized they didn't know how to make anything. They didn't know how to cook. So
But I love cooking too, fortunately. But yeah, we had exactly the same things. We couldn't get basic ingredients. Everything was really restricted. Going to the shops was a massive chore because you had to queue and stuff. So yeah, it feels like the joy went out of it for quite a long time.
and we still have to queue up to get out at the supermarket and they tell you which lane to go to. And every week it amazes me that they tell the person in front of me, like, go to the cashier number 7. And they go, 7? Where's 7? And I'm like, the numbers are up in the air. Like, wow. And every week I joke with the person and I was like, you just didn't know when you got your job that all you're going to do is tell people which line to go to. And they'd ask you which number it is. Like, because it's like everybody got incredibly dumb, like all of a sudden as well. And you're just there like, why are you doing these things? There's a whole lot to be written just about human behavior of what's happened these last couple of months of who's actually gotten their act together and who is just, I can't have toilet paper even though I've got 99 rolls at my house. What if I can't get it again? And I just realized that it's like a snowstorm and everybody buys the eggs, the milk, and the bread, and there's none in the store. Meanwhile, everyone in your town owns an SUV. And like, isn't that really so you can go to the store again? It's just, you watch human behavior. If you just back up in a store, if you ever get stuck, I feel like you just back up in the store and watch people and say, I can go home and write today. I got it.
In like 100 years, they're going to be looking back at this, Carol, and being like, this fascinating insight into the lockdown period of 2020.
in 2020. And, we don't really know anything about 1918, but this we're going to have a lot on. And I have to say the homeschooling part of it, I would have so flunked. I joke right now that their parents who have older children always go, I wish they were little. None of us are saying that now. Like there isn't one parent I know that's going, gee, I wish I could homeschool tomorrow. Really would love to be doing that.
Yeah, there's a reason I didn't become a teacher, and I'm rapidly finding out that reason.
Exactly. We have one friend who teaches kindergarten, and she said it starts out well on Zoom. They're all there. And then one by one, they disappear and they come back with like their dog or their cat or something like that. And she said, all of a sudden you realize you're teaching a class of animals and none of the children are there. So there's so many humorous stories that do come out of a very sad and scary time of just the way human behavior starts to interact. And it also, you sometimes watch people in a big Zoom meeting and you realize some people look like they have not a care of acting like they want to be there. And you're watching this whole room and I'm like, do you realize you haven't looked up at all? And it's just really funny. But there's so much fodder, I feel, there for writers right now because you're observing people in their own situations and seeing like who they are and what they do.
About this for the next 10 years, 20 years probably, just to get it all out of our psyches.
Well, everybody's been down in the same lockdown syndrome that you've been writing about for years, except we have internet.
To read it is the question because we'll all have been, living through it. Will we want to revisit it in fiction? But that's for the publishers to figure out.
I was talking to somebody yesterday who's in Houston and they have 2 hurricanes are headed there now. I said, whoa, a pandemic and a hurricane, 2 hurricanes. I said, it's like they're one-upping the odds like the whole time. And I was like, it's like a really bad crime novel of like, what's going to happen next? And then let's do this. And then let's do that. We lost power a couple of weeks ago. So what I was thinking was reading the book is like all the things you can't do. And it's just not going to happen. You have to go in your closet and there's no light on. You can't see what's going on. So that's really all the little details that you've got going on in the book is you're in the dark. It's like, how are you going to survive?
It was very weird that obviously I wrote it last year when none of us had any idea that, this what was coming in 2020. But I edited much of it in lockdown, and that was a strange experience because it is very claustrophobic, and a lot of the stuff that the characters are worried about, like food running out and the toilet paper running out and the power coming off, it is like, okay, this is a little bit too close to home. So I'm quite glad that it's being released now when I think we all feel a little bit more decompressed and we're not out of the woods, but it feels a little bit safer and saner. So
yeah, and it's also going to make a really warm day at the beach feel a lot cooler. I'm glad it's coming out in September. It's like perfect timing.
Literally.
This has been such a pleasure. I'm so glad we got to do this because I haven't really talked to you since I think you were in New York for a Simon & Schuster event in the middle, but I didn't get to interview you. And now to get to be able to do this again after so much success, and I wish you so much success with this book because one by one, the books have gotten better and better. And folks, I am telling you, this is the best one. It is.
Thank you, Carol. That makes me so happy. And what a pleasure to kind of square the circle and come back 6 years later.
And believe me, I'd do this again in a heartbeat. So write another book. If we're all locked down, we're still going to do this again. Okay. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Carol. Take care.
Take care. And to our readers, look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for joining us today.